There were two separate 911 calls, one from a quiet house on Lawson Ridge Drive, the other from a dirt road on the far edge of Columbia. Hours apart, two scenes that didn't seem connected at first, but both ended in the same word: homicide. In the first, an elderly woman was found dead and dumped in her basement. No forced entry, no missing valuables, until the locked door downstairs was forced open. The second, an abandoned car in a ditch, driver's door wide open, blood on the seat, no one in sight. The victim, a well-known pastor, was later pulled from a shallow creek 40 miles away, his body wrapped in tarp, his phone still ringing in his pocket. At the center of it all, a woman who had once been praised for turning her life around. A woman the pastor had quietly married just months earlier. She had no past on record, no childhood friends, no family anyone could find. And as investigators would soon discover, she had far more to hide than anyone imagined. Because the secret she was protecting was something she was willing to kill twice to bury, and she nearly got away with it. It started with silence, first from Luella Tolliver, then from her son, Pastor Jalen Tolliver. On the morning of August 9, 2023, police were dispatched to a quiet neighborhood off Lawson Ridge Drive in Columbia, South Carolina. A 911 call had come from Dr. Royce Tramble, a retired physician who had been seeing Luella for several months. He told dispatch that something wasn't right. He hadn't heard from Luella in 2 days, which was unlike her. When he stopped by the house, her car was in the driveway, the blinds were drawn, and her phone rang unanswered. Responding officers knocked, then forced entry. The living room and kitchen were clean. Too clean, according to later reports. Counters wiped down, floor mopped, not a single dish in the sink. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air. Nothing was overturned, no signs of struggle. But something about the silence pressed down like a weight. And then they found the basement door, locked from the inside with a key deadbolt. They forced it open. At the bottom of the narrow steps, just beyond the old storage shelves and washer-dryer, lay Luella Tolliver. Face down, shoes still on, with 2 bullet wounds to the back of her head. Her purse and phone were upstairs. No signs of a break-in, no ransacked rooms, just a perfectly staged surface, and a concealed execution. Before the department could release a formal report, another call came in. This time from a utilities crew working along a remote county service road about 40 miles outside the city. They had come across an abandoned black sedan with the engine off. Blood was visible on the front seat and smeared across the steering wheel. The car was registered to Pastor Jalen Tolliver. Initial efforts to locate Jalen were unsuccessful. By 8 p.m., a full-scale missing person bulletin was released for Pastor Tolliver. An aerial search was conducted that night near the service road. It wasn't until the following morning that a K-9 unit found what they were looking for. Buried beneath wet tarp and caked mud lay the body of a black male in slacks and a dress shirt. 5 gunshot wounds. No ID on him, but the wedding ring, bracelet, and facial features matched Jalen's profile. The county coroner confirmed the identity 2 days later. The wounds were fresh, less than 36 hours old. The blood in the car matched his DNA. Inside the Columbia Police Department, investigators were already working off a much quieter headline. This wasn't random. Forensics at both scenes told a story of deliberate action. Luella was killed in her own home, the body hidden, the upstairs staged. Jalen was lured to a remote area and shot at close range. Both were executed within hours of each other. The timing wasn't accidental. It was coordinated. But who had motive to kill a mother and her son in 2 separate locations with such surgical precision? Investigators began tracing Jalen's last known contacts. The last person he spoke with? His wife, Ariah Wells Tolliver. Ariah told church members she hadn't seen Jalen since the morning before. She said he was running late for ministry work and had promised to call later. That call never came. But her story was thin, and her silence after the murders even thinner. She wasn't present at Luella's home. She never showed up at the hospital after Jalen was found. She skipped every family gathering. And when officers went to their home to speak with her, it was already empty. No bags, no clothes, no forwarding address. The double discovery was no longer just tragic. It was premeditated. And Ariah Wells had vanished. The marriage between Jalen Tolliver and Ariah Wells had always been quiet. Too quiet for some who knew him. There had been no grand announcement, no large ceremony, no honeymoon photos posted to social media. In fact, most of Jalen's congregation only learned about the wedding weeks after it happened, when he began introducing Ariah as his wife in private settings. The two had married in the fall of 2022 at a small courthouse in neighboring Lexington County. No family present. No photos circulated. Even Luella Tolliver, Jalen's mother, wasn't formally invited, though she claimed she gave her blessing after the fact. But that blessing, according to those close to her, came with a heavy dose of hesitation. What the public didn't know was that Jalen and Ariah hadn't met through church functions, community outreach, or some wholesome online dating platform. Their first interaction occurred through an escort service. Ariah had been living under another name in Atlanta prior to moving to South Carolina. She relocated to Columbia just over a year before the marriage, leaving behind a paper trail of online profiles, including one connected to a high-end escort directory. Investigators later learned that Jalen had been a long-term client, having met Ariah several times over the span of 3 months before beginning what he would later describe to one friend as a serious relationship with a woman who had changed her life. When asked by close confidants, Jalen never disclosed how they met. He would simply say, "She's not who she used to be." Ariah, too, kept her story minimal. She told people she moved to Columbia for a fresh start and left behind a difficult past in Georgia. She claimed to have no remaining family. In truth, Ariah had undergone gender transition surgery years earlier, legally changing her identity across state lines. It was a process done carefully, quietly, and with every intention of never speaking of it again. There is no evidence that Jalen Tolliver knew about her gender history at the time of their wedding, and no documentation from their marriage license suggested anything out of the ordinary. But what investigators later uncovered through medical records, prescription histories, and Ariah's own confession pointed to a very different reality. The secret wasn't just her past career, it was her origin. The home they shared in Columbia was modest. According to neighbors, Ariah was often seen leaving during the day in business casual attire, but no one seemed to know where she worked. Surveillance later showed she frequently visited multiple hotels along the interstate corridor, often staying for less than an hour. One neighbor noted that Ariah would return late in the evening, sometimes in a different outfit, and always alone. Jalen, on the other hand, maintained a tight routine. He kept a relatively low public profile, despite being a preacher. He led a small congregation part-time, but focused primarily on freelance accounting work to make ends meet. Most people described him as quiet, polite, and deeply committed to his mother, Luella. After years of ups and downs, he had slowly rebuilt his image, and, by all accounts, was trying to maintain a stable life. But by spring of 2023, tensions had begun surfacing. Luella, though polite, remained distant with Ariah. She never said it openly, but she had suspicions, It wasn't until she began seeing Dr. Royce Tramble, an old friend and retired physician, that her suspicions took form. While scrolling through his phone one day, Royce recognized Ariah's photo in a small framed wedding picture on Luella's counter. He went quiet, then asked if that was her son's wife. When Luella confirmed it, he asked if she knew how they had met. That question led to a confession. Royce explained that he had once hired Ariah from a high-end escort app shortly after losing his wife. He said he met her in Atlanta years ago and only saw her once. But what caught his attention then was a specific medication bottle she had in her handbag, one commonly associated with gender transition therapy. He hadn't thought much of it until he saw her again in that photo. Later that week, Royce showed Luella screenshots of Ariah's old escort profile, matched by metadata and verified through IP logs by authorities later on. Luella said little in response. She simply asked for a printed copy. The next day, she gave it to her son. What was said in that conversation would remain known only through Ariah's later statement. But what happened next would set off a chain reaction that no one saw coming. According to Ariah's later confession, the conversation with Jalen that night was calm, eerily so. She claimed he didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse her outright. Instead, he asked questions, gently but directly, about the past she had never shared. The escort history didn't surprise him much. What he wanted to know was if what his mother had told him about the gender change was true. Ariah denied it. She said she laughed it off, brushed it aside, told him it was all part of a smear campaign from his overbearing mother, who never liked her anyway. But Jalen didn't push further. He simply stared at her for a moment and, in her own words, said something that unnerved her. "If that's really true, I could kill someone for hiding something like that from me." She claimed they laughed it off. Had dinner. Slept in the same bed that night. Nothing else was said. But Ariah didn't sleep. She later told investigators she spent most of that night staring at the ceiling, knowing the calm wouldn't last. Her greatest fear wasn't just that Jalen might leave her. It was what he might do once he knew everything. She believed he would expose her past, humiliate her, destroy the new identity she'd fought years to build. By morning, Jalen had already left for a preaching engagement 2 counties away. Ariah watched him drive off and waited for the street to go quiet. Then she packed a small duffel bag, placed a .38 revolver in her coat, and drove to Luella Tolliver's home. The route was familiar. She knew Luella's habits. The older woman lived alone, maintained a modest morning routine, and often left the back door unlocked during daytime hours. But on that morning, she didn't have to use the back entrance. Luella was home, alone, and surprised to see her daughter-in-law on a weekday morning. What followed was never witnessed, but forensic evidence told the story. Luella was shot twice in the back of the head inside her home and dragged to her basement. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. She never saw it coming. After the murder, Ariah began cleaning. Bleach on the stairs, wiping down doorknobs. She placed Luella's phone inside a kitchen drawer and locked the basement door from the inside, something only someone familiar with the layout would know how to do. She stayed less than an hour. From there, Ariah returned home. Surveillance footage captured her entering with a large black duffel, which she would later leave the house with again, only now accompanied by packed clothes, a burner phone, and a different set of license plates she attached to her car. By early afternoon, she had checked into a roadside motel just outside Irmo under a false name. That evening, she called Jalen. Phone records confirmed the short call. Ariah told him her car had broken down along a wooded service road near the interstate and asked if he could come pick her up on his way back. It wasn't unusual. Jalen had helped her out of plenty of roadside situations before. He agreed, and by 7:40 p.m., his phone pinged on that same rural road. A neighbor from a farmhouse nearby would later report hearing what sounded like gunshots in the distance. 5, spaced out, then silence. Ariah never drove back alone. Instead, she had brought someone else with her. Marquise Devine, the man she had been secretly involved with for months, arrived at the remote service road shortly after. He wasn't an accomplice by accident. He was her backup. The moment Jalen stepped out of his car to help her, Ariah shot him 5 times. Then, with Marquise's help, they dragged Jalen's body into her car, drove out to a muddy creek just outside town, and dumped him beneath the water. His vehicle was left abandoned where he was shot. Near Jalen's body, an old motel receipt was found soaked, but still partially legible. The room was rented under a false name, but video surveillance showed Ariah checking in the same night Jalen was killed, wearing the same jacket spotted in rural surveillance pulling up behind his car. That motel slip would be the first in a chain of forensic breadcrumbs that pointed directly to her. The motel check-in footage sealed it. The timestamp matched the night of Jalen's murder, and there was no mistaking the woman at the reception desk. Though she wore a wide-brimmed hat and a scarf partially wrapped around her face, her frame, walk, and even her nails matched Ariah Wells. The front desk clerk later confirmed she paid in cash and used the name Shonda Pierce, signing with a loose cursive. At first, police treated it as circumstantial, until they searched the room. Hidden in the bathroom trash was a used glove and a makeup wipe with traces of blood, later matched to Jalen. The bed showed faint smudges on the comforter, consistent with someone packing hurriedly while wearing latex. In the nightstand drawer, they found a burner phone, dead, but later recovered forensics revealed it had pinged both Ariah's and Marquise Devine's numbers multiple times the week leading up to the murder. It was no longer a missing person case. Ariah was officially the prime suspect in a double homicide. Jalen and his mother. But police needed more than fragments. They needed intent. They needed the motive. That came from a tip placed 2 days later. A man contacted the Columbia Police Department after seeing Ariah's image quietly posted in connection with Jalen's case. He asked to remain anonymous, but agreed to speak with a detective. The man was clear and direct. "I recognize her. Not personally, but from an escort platform. Elite Black Lux." When asked for proof, he provided screenshots, archived listings, masked but with identical tattoos to Ariah's, pricing that matched bank transfers to her known alias accounts, and messages that had been pulled from his encrypted email years ago. It wasn't just a random claim, it was confirmed. But that wasn't the end of it. Dr. Royce Tramble had an unexpected connection to the case. He was currently dating Luella Tolliver, Jalen's mother. Royce explained that he hadn't known of the connection at first, but one evening, Luella showed him wedding photos from her son's small ceremony. When he saw Ariah in the picture, his face changed. He didn't mention it immediately. Instead, he went home, dug through his old records, and found the receipts, screenshots, and a photo of the medication Ariah had accidentally left on his dresser the night they met. Estradiol, a hormone used in gender transition. That's when he sat Luella down and told her everything. From the escort encounter to what he suspected about Ariah's transition. At first, she didn't believe him. But when he showed her the old screenshots and payment receipts, Luella grew silent. The next day, Luella confronted her son. By now, police had built enough circumstantial and digital evidence to locate Ariah's possible hideouts. But she had gone dark. No activity on her personal phone, no bank transactions, no known vehicle registered to her, so investigators took a different route. They went back to Elite Black Lux. A detective posed as a client, using methods informed by Royce's original encounter. Same time range, same service codes, same wording. Days passed. Then, a response. Using the alias Ariah Storm, a client meeting was booked at a mid-range hotel off I-20. The photo sent with the confirmation, cropped and filtered, was unmistakable. And when Ariah walked through the lobby that night, wearing a wig and hoodie, carrying the same designer clutch she was last seen with, she didn't make it past reception. She was taken into custody on the spot. For 24 hours, Ariah said nothing. She sat motionless in the interview room at Columbia's precinct headquarters. No visible emotion. No questions. Just a quiet stare and silence that, according to detectives, felt more deliberate than defeated. But on the second day, after a second round of interrogation, fingerprint confirmation, and surveillance footage from the motel, the remote service road, and the escort sting, Ariah finally spoke. And when she did, she gave investigators everything. The confession was cold, straightforward, calculated. She admitted to killing both Jalen and his mother. The story she told wasn't drenched in tears or regret. It was, as one officer described it, like reading instructions off a page. She said she had feared Luella's revelation would destroy her life. That once the truth about her gender history came out, Jalen would leave her, the church would turn on her, and the life she'd finally built for herself would collapse. But what hurt more, she claimed, was that Jalen had already known. He just didn't want to admit it, she said. He played calm. But I saw the change. He looked at me like I was some kind of monster. She described the moment she decided to kill Luella as the turning point. According to her account, the morning after the confrontation, she drove to Luella's house. She brought a handgun wrapped in a towel inside her purse. Luella opened the door like nothing was wrong. They sat for a while in the living room. Ariah claimed Luella didn't even mention the night before, but the tension was unbearable. At some point, she asked to use the bathroom. Instead, she slipped down the hallway into the laundry room, entered the basement stairwell, and waited until Luella went to the kitchen. Then she shot her twice in the back of the head and dragged her body downstairs. She cleaned what she could with bleach and ammonia, stuffed the rag in a garbage bag, and left through the back door. That same evening, she packed her things into a duffel bag, texted Jalen from a burner phone, and claimed her car had broken down on a rural service road near Little Fork Creek. He was on his way back from a church program. She asked him to pick her up. When Jalen arrived and stepped out of his car, Ariah pulled the same gun from her bag and shot him 5 times in the chest and leg. The final shot was behind his ear as he fell. What came next, she claimed, was pre-arranged. Her side lover, Marquise Devine, pulled in behind her 15 minutes later. They loaded Jalen's body into the trunk of Ariah's car and drove out to the creek. She gave Marquise vague details, told him it was a scare gone wrong, and she needed help to handle it clean. He never asked questions. According to her, he was used to messes. They dumped the body in a muddy embankment, took back roads into the city, and abandoned Jalen's car. Afterward, Ariah changed into fresh clothes at a motel and used a burner phone to send a text to her cousin, saying she was traveling for a few days. But the lie couldn't hold. Her fingerprints were all over Luella's back door. Surveillance showed her movements across 3 towns. And the burner phone? Traced back to the same convenience store where she'd been caught on camera buying it just 2 days before the killings. As the full confession was logged, one of the detectives asked her one last question. "Did you ever love him?" She didn't respond, but the corner of her lip twitched. It was the only time in hours her expression changed. When the charges were formally read out on a rainy Monday morning in Columbia's county court, the city's quiet tension finally erupted. Ariah Wells, known publicly as the poised, reserved wife of a mid-sized community preacher, was now indicted for 2 counts of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, illegal possession of a firearm, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Marquise Devine, who was arrested days later, was charged as an accessory after the fact, with added counts for unlawful disposal of a human body. The story shocked many. Not because Ariah was transgender. That, for many, wasn't the biggest shock. What unsettled the community was how long she had played the role so well. How meticulously she had constructed a persona that concealed not just a past, but a future built on secrecy. The church community was split. A handful of parishioners came forward to say they had always felt something was off, though none could explain what. Others were in denial. Jalen loved her, one member said during a quiet vigil. He must have known. And if he could forgive it, who were we to judge? But outside the church, the backlash came fast and unfiltered. Online forums exploded with accusations, mockery, and blame. Some directed at Ariah, others at Jalen, and many toward the institution of marriage itself. Certain media outlets leaned hard into the double life narrative, painting Jalen as a hypocritical preacher who had been involved with escorts and ignored warning signs. But his family, still grieving, pushed back against any character smearing. "We're not excusing his flaws," said his cousin Darnell at a press conference, "but flaws don't earn you a bullet." Meanwhile, Ariah remained in solitary confinement, not for her own protection, but to prevent potential violence from other inmates. The nature of the crime, especially the deception involved, had triggered visceral reactions across the prison system. One correctional officer described her as eerily calm, noting how she would sit on her bunk and recite verses from memory. Not scripture, poetry. On the day of her first court appearance, she wore a gray jumpsuit and stared straight ahead. No handcuffs, no tears, no apologies. By late spring of 2024, Richland County prosecutors had what they believed was a strong enough case to pursue the death penalty against Ariah Wells. 2 murders, one premeditated, one deceptive, carried enough weight to justify it under South Carolina law. But there was one complication. Marquise Devine. From the moment he was arrested, Marquise refused to speak. For weeks, investigators had no clear understanding of how much he really knew, if he was just a cleanup man or a co-conspirator. Surveillance footage showed him arriving at the remote location, assisting with Jalen's body, and later appearing on motel cameras. But the line between accessory and accomplice remained blurry. It wasn't until prosecutors offered him a deal, limited prison time in exchange for full cooperation, that Marquise finally opened up. And when he did, the prosecution's strategy shifted overnight. Marquise confessed that he and Ariah had been involved for nearly 6 months. They'd met through one of the escort platforms she occasionally reactivated during financial slumps. He knew about her past, but didn't care. "She told me everything," he said, "from the surgery to the marriage to how she was tired of hiding." According to him, the plan to eliminate Jalen had been brewing for weeks. Ariah believed it was only a matter of time before her secret would be exposed. He denied knowing about Luella's murder in advance. He claimed he thought she was just gonna leave him. But once he saw Jalen's body on the ground and Ariah holding a smoking gun, there was no going back. He said she tossed him the keys, told him to follow the route. They had already scouted the creek location days prior. He thought it was for something else. With his cooperation secured, the DA's office made a strategic shift. Rather than pursuing the death penalty, they refocused their energy on locking in 2 consecutive life sentences, guaranteed, airtight, and immune to future appeals. Prosecutors defended the decision. With Marquise's testimony, we can avoid a prolonged trial, protect the victim's family from reliving trauma, and guarantee that Ariah will never walk free again, said the lead attorney. It's not about vengeance. It's about justice that holds. Behind the scenes, Jalen's family was divided. His mother's longtime partner, Dr. Royce Tramble, expressed frustration. She executed both of them. She didn't just kill. She staged. She lied. She danced around cameras and search parties. If that's not enough for the strongest punishment possible, what is? But others, like Jalen's brother, just wanted closure. We've already lost enough. No trial is going to bring them back. Ariah's public defender didn't deny the plea discussions were underway. He simply said, Ms. Wells is aware of the weight of the evidence. She's considering what outcome brings the least harm to those still standing. Still standing. It was a haunting phrase, especially for those who remembered Jalen's Sunday messages about rebuilding broken things. Now, it was his broken family, fractured congregation, and disillusioned followers who had to pick up the pieces. Ariah would plead guilty to 2 counts of murder, 1 count of obstruction, and 1 count of unlawful disposal of human remains. In exchange, she would avoid the death penalty and serve 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. Marquise Devine, seated in a separate hearing later that day, would plead guilty to accessory after the fact and receive 12 years in prison with eligibility for parole in 6. Family buried Jalen in the same plot as his mother, just outside Lexington, in a small, private ceremony attended by less than 30 people. His brother read the eulogy. His nieces, who used to run into his arms on Sunday mornings, left handwritten notes in his casket. There were no long tributes, no staged remembrance service, just grief. Jalen's family continues to raise awareness about domestic deception, betrayal, and the emotional cost of secrets left too long in the dark. Some stories end with justice, others with answers, but this one ends with silence, and maybe that's all it ever had to offer. If this case left you stunned, take a second to like this video. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Jalen's shoes? And if you want more true crime stories that cut deep and stay with you, hit subscribe. There's more coming, the kind you'll never forget. See you in the next case.